Her bio's already on the VicTESOL website, but you can see from that, if you've had a read, that she's a very experienced EAL teacher and a leader in various positions within the EAL world, and so she's got a whole lot of different experiences that she's bringing to bear this afternoon. I'll keep this short because she's only got half an hour, but can you join me in welcoming Rosemary?
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your lunch break. I sure did. A bit nervous, though, but thank you for coming and listening to my presentation this afternoon. I hope you glean something from it and take it away with you. As Michelle said, my name's Rosemary. I've been an EAL teacher for most of my teaching career, and I've worked in a number of places, originally starting off in a language centre and now in mainstream. So here we go. And I'm not really good with ICT. Here we go. How do we acquire language? I've got to come a little bit closer because I'm looking at the screen down here. How do we acquire language? Can you hear me? I shouldn't move away too far. And what supports us? What supports are required for successful language acquisition? Those were two questions that I asked myself right at the beginning before I started teaching. Once I'd completed my degree in linguistics. So I had gone off to uni to study, wasn't too sure where I was going to be heading. Started off doing a course, decided that wasn't for me, and then picked up linguistics as a subject and found that I really had an interest in language acquisition and language learning, and it led me down the path of teaching, which I thought was really interesting because my whole time at high school and before that I used to think that anyone that went into teaching was very brave and very silly, but to be. So I did a bit of CRT, went overseas, travelled a bit, and then came back and did some CRT work for a few months. And while I was doing that, I worked in a few places, but I really got my first teaching position in Traralgon, up in Gippsland, if you're not sure where that is, not far from Morwell. And I realised that I was just a stone's throw away from where I was born, up in the country. I'm a country girl at heart. And that got me back thinking about learning, and I thought to myself, there was never a time that I wasn't bilingual. So I went to school, I knew I could speak English, I could speak another language as well. How did I learn both those languages? What kind of things helped me? And it was really interesting listening to Jane this morning where she was saying about the different places that we can learn English. I recall my parents, they were into business and were moving around all the time. But one of the key things that happened to me was that I always had friends to go off and play with. So whether it was I used to spend lots of Saturday afternoons at the Air Force Base in Laverton and going to picnics and to the beach with various, I think they were family friends, but I think maybe my parents were very strategic in ensuring that I had a lot of opportunities to learn English. So I think that's really important, and it just dawned on me now because I always wondered why was I able to fit into school quite easily. But saying that, I know that it's not the case for every single person that comes from a home where English is the second language. And so what do we do to ensure that those children have the best opportunities to learn, and how can we support them in their learning? So prior to getting my position at Gippsland, I worked at Noble Park English Language Centre as a CRT. And whilst I was working there, I realised that EAL was an area that I was interested in, and it might be an area that would, fulfil my passion maybe for teaching. And I was really lucky because at the end of the year that I was up in Gippsland, there was SELC, Springvale English Language Centre, was being established. And I was very fortunate that I had a very understanding principal at the time. And he waved his magic wand, I believe, and I ended up at SELC as one of the teachers there, which was a fantastic experience for me. So, on this journey of leadership, what did I learn? So, whilst I was working at Springvale English Language Centre, I learnt the craft of teaching. I think that we need to realise that teaching is a real craft. It's something that we need to practice and foster and grow and develop all the time. One of the things that I say to all the graduates that come in and that I have the opportunity to work with as a mentor, I'm still learning about teaching. I'm still learning my craft, and I don't think you ever stop learning, and it's really important to always keep that in mind. So I also developed a passion for teaching, and I think I was really lucky because I worked with a fabulous team of people who were passionate about their job, who were fantastic at leading, and two of them are in the room, and I said to them that if they came in today, I was going to name and shame. I might do that a little bit later. Whilst I was at Springvale, I learnt the art of collaboration and the importance of teamwork. In order to achieve great things, I think you need to be part of a team and working collaboratively. I think that the team that we were at SELC were brilliant. We worked really well together and we encouraged each other to take those next steps. So, leading out of the classroom into leadership. Opportunities were there and we just encouraged each other to go for it. And we had fantastic leadership that also was very encouraging. So for me to step into leadership and move out of the classroom, I think I've been quite lucky with the opportunities because I've always worked with people who were very supportive, and that started at Springvale English Language Centre. The exceptional leadership that I talked about, Mark Maligan and Kay Rothstadt, absolutely fantastic models and mentors and coaches. I couldn't speak more highly of the people that I worked with. And so they taught me a lot about leadership and what good leadership looks like. And it's that whole notion of working together. We lead by example. And that's something that I've tried to maintain throughout my teaching career and taking and leading into the next phase of my teaching. Currently, I'm at Dandenong North Primary School. So I left SELC nearly 10 years ago. And that arose in a really funny sort of way. In 2005, the principal and the vice principal at Dandenong North Primary were very interested in starting a new pilot program. I had worked there previously as an outpost teacher and in the new arrivals program. And Dandenong North was a school that always catered for their EAL students. They always had EAL teachers in place for their students. And at the end of 2005, I was approached and they wanted to start a pilot program. And we sat down and had a few discussions about what their expectations were and what I thought perhaps they needed, having worked there in the new arrivals program and seen their EAL program. And we came up with a program. And in 2006, I started working there whilst I was still working at the Language Centre, because at that time I had come back from family leave and was working 0.5 at Springvale, team teaching. And we commenced a part-time program at Dandenong North, just catering for the year 5 and 6 students. And I probably had about maybe 12, 15 students at that time, which worked really quite well. I'm just trying to think now. Subsequently, the program ran really well, and teachers, there was positive feedback from the classroom teachers. We selected children based on children that were eligible for the program were selected on how long they had been in Australia. So any child that had been in Australia for less than 3 years and had just come out of a language centre were eligible for the program. And that was something that in consultation with the principal class, were the requirements that I came up with. So when I moved into Dandenong North, there were no guidelines as to how this program was going to run. So I made the guidelines up as I went along. So as situations arose, I would develop a new guideline. And so the first thing that we did was sort of prioritise the children that were eligible for that program. I was only there 2 days a week, so I had to pick the children that were in need most. From there, the program continued to grow, and it is still growing today. So in 2007, it became a full-time program, and with me as the teacher, and we started to include the grade 3-4 students. I think the leadership team at the time, the principal class, could see that there was a difference being made with the 5-6 students, and therefore wanted to include the next level of children. So that went on for about a year, 2007-8. By 2009, there was a second person that was introduced to the transition program on a part-time basis. So it was 0.6. And what we did was we split the children up into 2 lots. I still worked with the 5-6s, and the second teacher worked with the 3-4s for 0.6 of the time. And what we tried to do was, when I was at the language centre, we had endeavoured to give the children 10 hours of tuition a week if we were in the outpost program. So I tried to do the same thing with this particular program, ensuring that the children were seen every day for 2 hours. And I think that's what is essential and what has made the program so successful at Dandenong North. So currently, since 2008, it's developed into a program with 5 full-time teachers. So currently, we have a new arrivals teacher that comes from Noble Park English Language Centre. There are 5 teachers who are working in the transition program. We called it the transition program at the time because it was children transiting from language centres into mainstream. So our program at Dandenong North is divided up into the B1, which is catered for, or A1s and B1s, which are catered for through Noble Park. Then we've got the B2 students, which normally the transition teachers look after, which is myself and 4 other teachers. And then we have 2 teachers full-time that are looking at the EAL students, so students that are working at the B3 or A2 stages of the continuum, and those children that have moved off the continuum but require some help still. Currently, we cater for 240 students within the EAL program. It's a little mini school, really. And what I do is I ensure that I get to know as many of those children as I possibly can. I'm the leading teacher there and the area leader for EAL, but I also teach full-time. So it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to get around, but I ensure that I see everyone that's enrolled and touch base with a few other teachers that might come into contact with any new students before they enter into the EAL program. Leadership at Dandenong North. Okay, so when I first went there, I had to build relationships with all the areas. So even though I worked with the 5-6 area predominantly, I had to ensure that I knew the other teams, the other area leaders, and that I could go and see them and approach them about students. So in the first few years that I was at Dandenong North, I wasn't in a leading teacher capacity. I was just a classroom teacher. No, I shouldn't say just. I was a classroom teacher. But as the years went on, so probably in about 2009, 2010, there seemed to be a shift in the climate at Dandenong North, for want of another word. And I found that I was being approached by the office staff a lot, and people were coming to me to ask for advice and strategies, and I think that was because when I first went there, and I was open and I tried to build these relationships with the various teams. So people, I think, felt comfortable coming and talking to me. When I first arrived at Dandenong North, the program, there was nothing there. I had to create my own program and the guidelines for that. So one of the very first things that I did was develop a scope and sequence of essential language learning. And what I mean by that was I sat down and I thought about the modes of learning, listening and speaking, reading, writing, and I thought, okay, what do they need to know essentially in listening and speaking? And I did the same thing with reading, and I did the same thing with writing, and I came up with an outline of things that I felt needed to be achieved, but I also ensured that I was following the companion at the same time. So I tried to develop a document that linked in with the EAL document, and also look towards the English document as well. So for me, it was moving away from just new arrivals teaching and thinking about EAL teaching in relation to children having to work in the mainstream classroom. Because when I'd been at the Language Centre, I really didn't think about that too much because, our core business was to get these children feeling comfortable and settled and learning language to survive socially as well as being able to work in the classroom. Having moved on into a mainstream school, then I started looking at it from the other perspective. I could see what was required of those children once they left the program, so I had to ensure that my program was in some way building up the skills that they would need to be able to function independently in the classroom. So coming up with my own scope and sequence was really helpful for me, so that then if any of the mainstream teachers came to ask me questions about what I was doing or how I was doing it, I could actually refer them to that particular document, and it was in really nice, simple language. It was really easy. I think sometimes mainstream teachers get a little bit nervous of EAL documents because they think, I need to have a TESOL qualification to be able to understand it and so forth, and that's not necessarily the case. So that scope and sequence really helped me a lot. One thing that I did do after I developed the scope and sequence, when the new document came out, the EAL Continuum, because it was online and people needed to refer to the EAL companion, but they also needed to refer to the Continuum as well, I then sat down and created a document that melded the two together. So I had a document that had the learning focus on one side and then the nutshell statements and the expectations of what children were to achieve. And I actually made that document, I put it on the SharePoint at work, and I made it accessible to every staff member in the school. And then I actually ran some PDs. So I would offer PDs after school. I'd go to area meetings. Individually, if people wanted to go through the document, I would work with them through that. And I suppose doing those sorts of things, because I was raising the profile of EAL, that sort of got the attention of the principal class. And from there, I was then I was an acting leading teacher for EAL, and I held that acting position for a while, and then 3 years ago it became substantive, and I applied for it and was successful in maintaining it. So I think the fact that I showed the principal class that I was open to helping other people, that I was a resource for my colleagues, was a really good. It put me, I suppose, in the spotlight a little bit. That they could see I wasn't just being passive. I was really active in promoting EAL and promoting the program, and I had a vision in my head when I was first approached in the early days. I knew what I wanted the EAL program to look like, and so I sort of steadily worked towards that. Whoops, that was really quick, wasn't it? I really had to demonstrate to the leadership team that even though they were supportive of EAL and they had EAL in the school, I really had to show them that EAL underpinned everything and it supported all the other literacy programs, and that it was a whole school. It wasn't just for the EAL students, that EAL strategies and thinking could be applied across the whole school. So it was about making EAL a whole school project, not just a few select people in a little room down the back dealing with it. It was for everybody within the school. I suppose the other thing that I tried to do was build a robust and dynamic EAL program, constantly modifying it and changing, trying to keep up with all the new initiatives that come out from the department and all the new research that we read about. So I tried to ensure that we were always changing within the program as well, keeping the key elements of good EAL strategies and teaching, but adding to it as well. I don't know how I'm going for time, Michelle. About 6 minutes. Beautiful. One thing that I do a lot is promote my team's experience and expertise. I don't know if anyone's heard of the EAL program at Dandenong North Primary School, but we actually get lots of visitors from interstate and from other schools in the area coming to see the program in action. And it wouldn't be the program that it is at the moment if it wasn't for the team of EAL teachers that work alongside, that I work alongside with. They're absolutely fantastic. They put in 110%, not just in terms of the teaching that they do, but the welfare and the looking after the students and the families. So to ensure that they're having a happy, successful learning experience. So, in conclusion, some of the things that I can tell you about my experience as in leadership is to have a goal or a vision of what an EAL program looks like. I mean, I know it's very hard to get sometimes your principals and other leading leaders of the school to see the value of EAL, but I think that if we have a goal and a vision of what it is and we can sell it to them, because it is a little bit like selling a product to them, it's a good step towards leadership. Taking responsibility. So I would, whenever something came up, I would just put my hand up and say, I'll have a go. I'll do this. So I tried to make myself be seen at the school, that I was prepared to take on additional things outside of my classroom, and that I wasn't hesitant in any shape or form, and I think that's held well for me. I always look for opportunities to advocate for the EAL students and for the EAL program. Whenever, in meetings, we're sitting in meetings, I think they get sick of me because my favourite word is from an EAL perspective, and then I just go off and ramble on. But I think it's really, really important to promote and advocate for our EAL students and our program. Always looking at ways to find ways of improving existing practice and EAL school policy. So, it's about self-reflection and seeing how the program's working, how can we make it better. This year, in previous years, we've focused mainly on the middle school 3 to 6 in terms of transition, whereas this year we looked at including the grade 1 students. We had a large number of prep students that came into the school last year that were EAL students. Some of them hadn't been to kindergarten. They didn't speak any English, and we found that we had a real bottleneck of grade 1 students in the EAL program. I think we had like something like 60 students. So then what we did was we introduced a transition program for those grade 1 students, and I went about selecting those students by talking to their previous grade prep teachers and by asking for data. Everything that I do, and whenever I go to the principals, I always ensure that I've got data to back up what I have and evidence to back up what I'm trying to push for. So in this particular case, I took along their benchmarking. I have requested from the grade 1 teachers to have a look at the EAL companion, and they actually identify their EAL students, prep EAL students, quite early in the year before they do reports, and then they give them, what we do is we give them an alternative report, an EAL report. They use the same reporting system that the EAL team uses, and they then place them against the EAL continuum. So I use that sort of data, plus I get their their benchmarking for reading and make a decision based on using those two pieces of information. I take that to the principal and the assistant principal and move forward from there. Always be open to change. I found in my time as moving from classroom teacher into leadership, open to change and new ideas from the whole team and from the school. I listen very carefully to what the mainstream teachers have to say about the children and how they're settling into class and what sort of things they can do and can't do, and then use that information to then look at our programming and decide where or if we need to make any changes to the curriculum. And share knowledge, be a resource with your leadership team, with your fellow colleagues and with the system. As I said, we receive many, many visitors from interstate and from around the area coming to have a look at what we do in EAL and how we go about it. And lots of schools don't have the kind of funding that we do, but they can take ideas from what we've done and see if they can adapt it to their setting. And I suppose the last thing, as a leader, I think it's a really good idea to remain a learner. I think we're constantly learning and reflecting on how we teach and what our programs look like and what best practice is. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank Rosemary. Rosemary, I know it's really difficult to fit all of your knowledge and what you've been doing into just half an hour. So it's been a really just looking at a big overview. But I think it's been great that we can all probably relate it to the situations that we're in. I really like the way that you've been so responsive to not only the needs of the learners, but also looking at the expertise of the classroom teachers and looking at how your program can develop. And I think in lots of ways EAL teachers are required to be leaders wherever they are. And so, we thank you for your insights.